Okay, it is now just over 4 p.m. So I'm going to start the session. So can I welcome everyone here and just say to those here in Australia, can I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, past and present, of the land on wherever our Australian registrations reside. Can I also acknowledge all our esteemed panelists in India and Australia? Each panelist's profile will be highlighted in your screen, which makes it easy to get that engagement. I'd also like to acknowledge over 150 registrations. It's been a great response to this initiative on very short notice. Today's program will commence with a welcome address by Dilip Chennai, the Secretary General of FICCI. It will then be followed by a check-in message by each panelist on the impact of the coronavirus in India and its implications for trade and investment in the Australian-India relationship. The session will strictly follow a 1-hour limit. So that is, we'll take the check-in messages, short dialogue, and then take-home messages. We're quite comfortable to receive questions by email, and those will be answered in due course, either by email or by phone call. It's obviously not possible within an hour to take questions from the audience. So without further ado, I shall call upon Dilip to deliver the welcome address. And his CV will be on the screen. Over to you, Dilip.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you, all of you, for attending, AIBC for co-hosting this discussion. Thank you, High Commissioner, for joining. And Jim, I was actually thinking of making a short presentation. Should I make that on India?
Please do that.
Okay. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll share my screen with everybody.
Good.
Okay. So it's a brief presentation on the the economic impact and mitigation. It's in different parts. One, I'll briefly go over the COVID, the global thing and projections for India. Second is some of the sectoral impact. And the third, I will talk about some measures taken by the government, and then what FICCI is doing for members in India. So, okay. So I will have to redo my sharing there.
Do you want to do it after each one does a check-in message? Or you want to do it now?
Yeah, I think I'll do that later. Yeah.
Okay, let's do that. So let's kick it off then. If I could ask Kaji, our First Assistant Secretary from the High Commission, to give your check-in message, which is, what do you wish to convey in relation to the impact of the coronavirus in India and the implications for the bilateral trade and investment between India and Australia? Over to you.
Thank you, Jim, AIBC office bearers. Thank you, FICCI, for giving us this opportunity to share our thoughts in this platform. And as you all are aware, India is on a virtual lockdown. The next phase is to be decided in a few days' time. So let's wait and watch what the policymakers in India actually decide going forward from here. Right now, the High Commission is actively engaged in looking after the welfare of students and temporary visitors here in Australia. That's our primary goal, objective, work, whatever you put it. The second thing that we are looking is to secure supply lines for fighting fighting COVID-19. We haven't had much successes in Australia, but we are being approached by our officials back home if we can help them secure some supply lines in fighting this COVID-19.
Okay.
Going forward, yeah.
Go ahead. Is that all you want to say?
Yeah, going forward, it would be a little difficult for me to comment on the trajectory that Australia, India, or the different economies in the world will take forward. But we are aware that certain, let's put it, opinion makers in Australia are called. I mean, there is a growing call for something called economic sovereignty. So let's wait and watch how that pans out. So I think I'd like to stop here. And then, of course, we are here. Anything that your member needs, if your members need to be facilitated when it comes to India, just reach out to us. We are here to help you out. Thanks.
Thanks very much. That's a very good intro. Can I ask Peter Verghese, who's our other panelist, and again on the profile you'll see on the screen. And Peter, would you like to share with us your key message in relation to the coronavirus in India and the bilateral relationship?
Yeah, thanks very much, Jim, and hello to fellow panelists. Look, I'll start very broad and then make a couple of comments about more specific things. You know, crises, in my view, tend to accelerate history rather than create history. But I think what we can say at the moment is that we're going to go through a very rough time, both in India and Australia. The scale of our problems will obviously vary because our circumstances are different. We'll have a domestic preoccupation, I think, for probably the balance of this year. The more significant implications are going to be on the economic trajectories of each of our countries. So India, which was slowing before COVID-19, will slow even further. Australia is looking at probably a recession, and globally, we'd be lucky if we get away with a recession rather than a depression. So the short to medium term outlook is fairly grim, but that doesn't mean that the longer term trends are fundamentally shifted. Just a couple of quick comments on sectors, and I'll focus on the sort of key sectors in the India economic strategy. Education obviously is going to be seriously affected for as long as border controls exist and for as long as employment prospects for Indian students in Australia have dried up. Resources, I think, were probably a bit less affected, but the slowing Indian economy is going to have less demand for Australian resources. Tourism, like education, very hard hit, but fingers crossed could recover more quickly from early 2021 if borders are open. And I think it's a bit too early to say what the investment impact is going to be in terms of Indian investment into Australia, but corporate India will be operating in a much more capital constrained environment. So gloomy short term, a bit more optimistic medium term, and I remain a long term believer in the potential of this relationship.
Thanks, Peter. That's a very good scene setter and a good opportunity then to ask Dr. Stephanie Fave, CEO of Austrade. You had that very successful AIBX 2020 in India, so over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jim. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say a few words. Just from the outset, I'd like to say that the relationship between Australia and India in terms of trade and investment has never been as important. But we do know that there are some impediments on both sides, and one of them is around the infrastructure. So in terms of flights, we know that both borders are closing, and so the passenger flights going between the two countries are also diminishing. And as we know, in the belly of all of those passenger planes is product, both export from Australia and coming back the other way, imports from India. So we're facing a general infrastructure constraint around the world, but it applies to India-Australia relations as much as anywhere else. And as we know, India is in lockdown, Australia is also in lockdown, and no one can really read the crystal ball, but we are optimistic that Australia is going to be able to flatten the curve, as they say, and India, the signs are also good at this stage. But as I say, we can't actually predict what it's going to look like in the long term. But from Austrade's point of view, we are working hard to ensure that air freight continues and that ports and shipping continues, because without that infrastructure connection, trade between our two countries is facing quite steep impediments. But as Peter mentioned, two of the services sector where Australia and India have very close connection is around education and tourism. And when we've been doing some of our scenario planning, when we look at international tourism, I think it's going to take some time to come back. The tourism sector in Australia, international tourism, was one of the first hit by coronavirus, and that came in on top of the problems that we had as a result of the bushfires. So our tourism industry was hit early, and it also appears that Australia is going to experience the impact of coronavirus for a longer period, partly because we're just heading into our winter, and also we're flattening the curve. So it means that the impact is going to be a little longer than perhaps in other countries. But what we can celebrate is that the death rate from coronavirus, so far we have it to a minimum. So it's that's the good news story. I just give you a little bit of an update on Austrade in India. As everyone knows, Austrade has several offices across India. We have more than 50 people. And Catherine Gallagher is our Senior Trade Commissioner, who is in Delhi. Most of our staff are working from home, but we're a very mobile organisation, and so that's happened seamlessly. And they're working very hard, working with Indian companies, and we're working on the other side here with Australian companies that have connections with India. And on our website, so if people want regular updates on what's happening in the India market, I'd invite them to go to Austrade's website, and we get on the ground updates on a regular basis. And we're trying to make that information available to all companies. And that information comes from our people on the ground in India. And the last thing I'll mention is that there is going to be another webinar, and it will be hosted by our High Commissioner in Delhi, the Honourable Barry Farrell. And Dilip, one of my fellow panellists, is going to be one of the speakers, together with the Country Director of Boston Consulting Group. So that's going to be held on the 28th of April. So I expect that that's also going to be of great interest to your members. So I'll leave it there. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. And the states and territories are an important player in Team Australia, and we have Jitesh Agarwal, who's the Queensland Trade and Investment Commissioner for India. So Jitesh, did you want to say a few words?
Thank you, Jim. Can you all hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good morning. Yeah. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Peter and Stephanie mentioned it, social distancing has also been distancing of men and money, just due to distancing from workplace and geographies. In such a scenario, India per se is heralding hope, proactiveness, and strict control of new regulations. Citizen participation has probably led to desired outcomes and may lead to desired outcomes. Between India and Queensland, the near-term impact would be on services, that's the education and tourism, There is some amount of force majeure by met coke importers on resources because there's a lack of movement in the construction, infra, and automotive sectors in India. Student mobility, of course, will be the biggest impact. The trajectories both countries would take probably would be of collaboration. And the good news today that we read of a new vaccine engagement between Griffith and Indian Immunologicals in Hyderabad, as well as what UQ is doing with the Dutch company. I think the entire world is looking forward to those fruitions of efforts, because that's the only thing that will give everyone confidence to start getting back to the normal until this new normal continues. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks very much. I see the UQ Vice Chancellor has the vaccine for UQ in there, so it's something we can talk about a bit later. Move on to Mukund, who's the CEO of Asia Link and very, very familiar with the Indian terrain for a while and very knowledgeable. So over to you, Mukund.
Jim, thanks so much for the invitation. I might just build on all the terrific insights that have been made and really get to the heart of Peter's India economic strategy, the strategy that Peter authored for the government, and speak about one very specific area that is related to outbound investments from Australia to India, because in that report, one of the two key measures of success was to grow outbound investment tenfold from Australia to India. And in my opinion, that is perhaps the most important area by which we need, or measure by which we should judge the long-term success of that strategy. And we know in Australia that because of COVID-19, there is a reported risk that up to about $50 billion might actually be withdrawn from our super fund. And so that poses the question for me of basically two scenarios: a pessimistic scenario that our super funds, because they're having to actually exit certain assets at the bottom of the price cycle in order to generate cash for these distributions, potentially they could become more risk averse and become less inclined to long-term investments in places like India. But on a more optimistic note, I think that it will actually sharpen the thinking on the allocation of capital when we come out of the particular phase of COVID-19, because there will actually be a need to allocate capital to long-term assets which provide better, or should I say superior, long-term risk-adjusted returns. And currently, of many of the emerging economies, actually India is performing a lot better. So notwithstanding that there are reduced forecasts for this final quarter of FY21 for the Indian economy, if you look at how that economy is still performing compared to many other high growth emerging economies, it's actually doing quite well. So I'm really focused on the flow of capital out of Australia into India, because I think that's the core measure of success in this relationship as per the India economic strategy. Of course, education, tourism are all extraordinarily important and just as important, but they've already been covered, so I won't repeat those points made. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Mukund. Let's now turn to Shiva, who's the CEO of Multi Connections and also just finished her term on the Australia-India Business Council. Very, very well versed in this area. Over to you, Shiva. Okay.
Can you hear me, Jim?
Yes, we can now.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Jim, for the opportunity. So to just share a few of my thoughts today, a lot of which is already covered off by a couple of folks and panelists in the team. From my perspective, I think sitting where I do and dealing with a couple of sectors which are quite crucial and critical to what it means for Australia as well as India, the relationship, I definitely see education as the number one. And we know that it's a huge, huge industry in India. It's almost, if I get the numbers right, over 100 billion. Of course, you know, Australia has a small proportion of that market share. But having said that, it was growing very, very rapidly. And in fact, the international students, the Indian international students have been showing the fastest growth over the past year or two. So I feel that that is something that is definitely going to be impacted. But while having said that, I feel that this is the time where I believe the international students are a little bit of a forgotten, lost tribe, as I might say. And if there are some things that we can do from, not just from the Business Council perspective, and I know we are thinking of initiatives, but also in general, if we could rally around and look at corporate Australia, the government, to see what we can do for the international students, I think this will be a great subliminal, soft sell approach that Australia can have and really be able to position ourselves as a country with a heart, not just a head that reaches out for the pockets. So that's my take on the education sector. Tourism and travel definitely affected in a very major way. But I do believe that Indians are, they are really solid travelers. They love tourism. They are anywhere and everywhere. Wherever you go, any city, any country, you'll find Indians there. So that, I believe, will gradually pick up. But what does worry me is very much the education sector. And this is where I believe from our end, if we really want this bilateral relationship to grow, we should really look at the international students who are stranded here and what can we do, because a message will go out loud and clear about what we are doing with them. I know Canada is doing a few things. That message is already out there. Word of mouth is very strong. The third thing I wanted to touch upon was really about the fact, which while it is a very horrible situation, none of us could have ever imagined this 4 months ago, but it has actually fast-tracked digitization. And I see that one of the things that I know Mr. Modi copped it when he went ahead with a whole lot of other programs like demonetization, as well as the bank accounts that he wanted to open up. But it's actually really good, because now digitization is being able to help all those people through the government grants and payments and so on. And I believe also it'll move towards the consumer habits of just not moving into a store face-to-face, but go for more e-commerce, which means more opportunities for us in Australia, just the way Dr. Safai just spoke about the transportation. Once that picks up, I do see e-commerce is going to be a really good opportunity for Australia too. So I would like to leave it at that and let the other panels speak.
Thanks very much. That's probably a good intro into that digital end. So let's ask Irfan Malik, who heads up IMQ Global Innovation. And I think we were both at AIS X 2020. So over to you, Irfan.
Thank you, Jim, and and to FICCI as well. Great to have this session, and I think it's very timely as well. So acknowledge that, and thanks for the work to get this all going. We had a great AIBX trip and outcomes. Obviously, it's sad that we couldn't continue the momentum, but again, there's all positive sides to it. So, great to hear all of you speak and share the insights of what's being experienced both sides. And I wear multiple hats both here in Australia and India. What I've seen being close to the startup innovation ecosystem is enormous amount of resilience and all kind of agility that the startup innovation ecosystem, both sides here in Australia and India, has demonstrated. Speaking of Australia, obviously the impact has been predominantly around the whole co-working space, the startup ecosystem where people have leveraged these spaces. They've been all kind of impacted. So all of them are remotely working, which the startup ecosystem is used to anyway, but the fact that they can't get to those events, those investor pitch sessions, and those face-to-face engagement, that's obviously impacting the startup innovation ecosystem. However, all of them are quite agile. They have looked at what the opportunity presents. So I've heard both here and India as well, startups kind of pivoting and retooling themselves in terms of what they offer to work on, ventilators, all the PPE kits, to telehealth solutions, drone-based mapping and surveillance to assist the government, and various kinds of things that's underway. So obviously, whilst there's been impact from an investment raise and traction that front, but people are also looking to improvise and cater to the needs. I know myself, I'm closely working with the National Stockpile here, as well as National Disaster Recovery Management Authority there in India, and teams as well across various states. There's a lot happening with the startups. There's also great initiatives even in Australia. The various stimulus packages have been introduced here that's also going to touch the startups, which I hear from the Startup Us team. And also in India, various states are looking to really spruce up the support for startup ecosystem as well. And also what I hear is, in fact, I was just going through certain states, they have a lot more activities happening now that it's all digital. A lot of them are used to Zoom and various digital platforms. So I see a positive outcome out of this. Obviously, people are physically impacted and challenged that they can't have these face-to-face sessions. But I think there's a positive outlook that people are looking forward to. We need to get out of through this lockdown mode we have, and we are all really looking forward to the positive side for the startup innovation ecosystem. And I'm glad that that kind of agility is being demonstrated in response to this global situation that we were facing.
Thanks very much. Let's go to the CEO of the State Bank of India and get that banking perspective. I know it's a big challenge both here and in India. So over to you, Pranay.
Yeah, thank you for a time, and thank you for asking me to join this particular program. And I will tell you that some of the real story. At this moment, when we are impacting the COVID-19 impacted there, more particularly between India and Australia trade, we as a bank, we are facing one peculiar problem. When Australia Post and DHL, they have denied taking post to India. And then this is the experience we are getting this experience for last 1 week or so. When the postal services is denied between India and Australia because of COVID-19, now the real challenge is that how the trade transaction will occur. So what we have done in the banking, we have gone to the different level in trade fraternity, and we have asked them at a special approval or a special consideration for accepting the document on a scan basis. Now the shipping company and the freight company, they are very hard for them to accept the document on the scan basis. So we have in India, we have introduced the system of letter of indemnity. So something needs to be done in Australia also, when the bank needs to accept the document based upon the letter of indemnity. This is one point. Second point is that particularly between India and Australia trade, when the Australia has to play a great role, the small and businesses company their liquidity has been sucked, or the liquidity has been stopped. So then there are two things is coming up. The small business player they are requesting a rollover of their facility, which means that they don't have money to pay at this moment, and they are looking for a rollover. And when then rollover will happen, then the large company, they have to actively consider and they have to defer their payment. So this thing, second thing, this need to be done. Third thing is that because they have to ensure that production is continuously to run, then extra liquidity need to be pumped in. Extra liquidity has to come either by way of through bank or from organization or from industry association. They have to pull out. So all three have to work: bank, industry association, and the company, and the sector domain has to work together to ensure that the trade between the two countries continuously flow or continuously grow. So COVID-19 is also giving another opportunity when all the trade company or all the company, they always have to look for a certain amount of buffer, number one. They also have to introduce certain amount of technology in the system, so that at this moment we are talking through a webinar or certain technology. So every company has to budget themselves for their technology. They have to budget themselves for the keeping the liquidity buffer. They have to budget themselves for certain amount of flexibility. So as from the bank per se, we are seeing the real scenario, and really we are facing certain amount of challenge at this moment.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Let's shift to to the digital side again with TCS, and if I could ask Mr. Subramanian, the head of sales and innovation, to speak and give his perspective.
Thanks, Jim, and the entire AIBC team here. So COVID-19 pandemic has emerged as a significant global challenge none of us have ever seen in our life, probably the World War II. Not even the GFC has seen. We've seen the impact of it and what we've undergoing currently. In the face of the current adversity, I look to the strength of human ingenuity that lies within each of us, how to bring out innovative solution which acts as a paradigm shift in this scenario. As Jim and Sheba and others have mentioned over here, this is going to affect every parts of the world, all parts of economy, about hitherto unseen till now. It starts with travel, transport, educational sector, and even in our IT sector, we're looking at options where we haven't seen before in terms of the visa regulations, in terms of work from home. Almost all our employees are working from home from India. That's a big, big challenge which we've enabled. So this sets up different processes, challenges which we are trying to solve currently. One of the key things we're going to see a great partnership between Government of India and Australia is in the education sector, as well as in the healthcare sector on that. So if you see currently how to solve the new COVID issues over here in terms of the new challenges and the medicine, both the countries are working together on that. And we have two strong governments, Modi and the ScoMo government, fighting from the front to sort out the issue, the COVID one, by keeping the infections down and flattening the curve currently. So it's a time where we have to see how we can enable different options like innovations in the industry and how we can have a collaborative approach to enable this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's a good, you're right. That's a good lead into NASSCOM and the general manager there, Samir Arora. Yeah. Samir, over to you. Your perspective.
Thanks, man. I've been speaking to a lot of NASSCOM members and our clients wearing my Infosys hat over the last few days. And a lot of what I'm going to say will be echoing what Badri just said, because we are witnessing one of the most abrupt changes in our lifetime in the business models as we transition to technology-based remote working in a space of just a few weeks. Suddenly working from home has become the norm now. And from where I sit, I don't think there is any exit strategy or silver bullet in the current environment, or there is a path to recovery for at least 12 months, if not more. Business as usual cannot continue or be seen as a safe option anymore. So all corporations have to act inversely, adopt a different approach, and ultimately think like a startup would do. That's what we are recommending to our members, both in AIBC and NASSCOM. To deal with the current crisis, companies will need more agile teams to replace the traditional team structures. They will need to choose speed to market versus excellence. This will allow for various parts of the organizations to work seamlessly together and can therefore quickly adapt to pivot to changing external circumstances. Well, in summary, if I had to leave one thought for the members and for the panelists, in the coming weeks and months, many companies will be required to plan for change in culture and behaviors that are focused on continuous learning, rapid innovation, resilience, optimism, risk-taking, and adaptability. And these are all those strengths and features that you would find in a startup. So what I'm trying to say is a startup mindset will be required even at the corporate level. I'll stop here for now.
Thanks, Samir. That's very good. Our last panelist who I'm trying to bring in is an expert on health. That's Tanya Uni. Is she there? Yes? Okay, if you could do your, yes, we can now. If you could do in your check-in message in relation to the impact of the coronavirus in India and its implications for the bilateral trade investment relationship between India and Australia. And you've got that health perspective, and you're also the national chapter head of health as well. So over to you.
Thank you very much. I think this meeting is really timely.
Your voice is not very good.
It's a situation that none of us expected. And as a result, hey, yeah, is that, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you better now. Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah. So in terms of how it's affected India and Australia, I would start by saying that none of the industries are actually immune to this, even the health industry. I'll tell you why. Any of the elective procedures, because health industry, it consists of elective and non-elective situations. So the elective situations here, like in the private sector, like planned procedures, none of that is working. So none of the health industry is completely immune. And how it's affecting the Indian economy is that it is important for hospitals, private hospitals, to maintain their staff, maintain their cash flow. They need to actually have this elective procedure as well as the emergency. So how does it affect us in Australia? It's pretty much the same situation. The way that we can actually approach this is actually being more proactive than having a reactive approach to the problem. Things like private sector, that in the hospitals and the labs and things, those kind of people, what they can do, the companies can do, is to cooperate with the government, adapt to the emerging situation, work together with the authorities, and reinvent what they can do and embrace any opportunities, any packages that the government is introducing. For instance, like there is a lot of COVID response packages that's coming about. So the private sector should be able to embrace that, take that opportunity, and so that they can maintain the cash flow, maintain the staff, maintain the payments and everything. And the other thing, what I would like to say is, we need to be, whether it's India or Australia, we need to be able to maintain and produce our own important materials like the personal protective equipment for the healthcare workers. And that is the manufacturing industry I'm talking about. So wherever possible, we should be able to manufacture in our own country so that we can help the healthcare workers, because they are important, they are soldiers, and that itself, I think, would help the industry growing and emerging. I don't know how much time I have. It's,
no,
you know, I can keep
that's about
talking.
it, actually. Just one more sentence. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically what I would say is, as the situation emerges, we should be prepared to adapt to it and also take any opportunity what the government, both sides, India and Australia, brings about.
Thank you very much for that. And that's a great multiplicity of very, very good perspectives. And I'd like now to ask the Secretary General of FICCI, Dilip, to make that presentation you wanted to before.
Okay,
yeah.
So I just thought that, you know, this is the global health and economic snapshot. And if you look at most of the countries here, at the time of going and making this presentation, and that's how quickly things are changing, it is showing that at least India would have a positive growth this year. But again, things are changing so fast that we can't actually predict anything at this point of time. The second is that there is a change in forecast between Moody's, CRISIL, Standard & Poor's. In fact, this morning a rating has come, one of the agencies has said 1.5%, right? So if you look at India and the health parameters, and if you look at India and the population above 65 years, and also in the share of GDP as services, we have some positives actually going on. But what has happened, the lockdown has actually impacted, you know, the demand, the whole aspect of supply, and also the financial sector, as was very aptly put by the SPI person. If you look at, just to give you a sense that different industries in India are facing the heat in different ways. I think tourism and aviation is around the same thing around the world. Media and entertainment, of course, online streaming is doing well, but the rest of, you know, movie making is stopped. Everything is happening. Some Australian films were being done in India, so that's also been, you know, put on the back burner at the moment. Retail and consumer durables also have. What FICCI has done is actually classified them currently, which spike in the short term, will have momentum like e-commerce, online healthcare, personal care, online entertainment, online education, and media. So, does the Australian education industry move from physical to online delivery in India? That's something else that we can actually look at going forward. Similarly, in the spiked in short term, stabilized in the long term, about 6 to 9 months of food retail, telecom, utility services, retail, pharmacy, and pharmaceuticals. The third bucket, which is hit in the short term and recover in 9 to 12 months, is apparel and beauty, insurance, agriculture, etc. I'll share this presentation with you. You can actually share it with your members. And then, of course, industries will take 12 to 24 months to actually recover, such as restaurants and food services, transportation and tourism. And this is assuming that there's some sort of a partial lift up of the lockdown post midnight of the 14th and 15th of April. We did a very quick survey amongst members 2 weeks ago. We're repeating this survey as we speak. And in fact, a lot of people felt that it was moderate to, if you say very high and high, it is over 53%, right? If you add moderate, it goes to, close to 81%, right? They're thinking of decreased order books. They're looking at, supply chain impact. I think someone mentioned about the lack of transportation, etc. And there's a huge delay in sourcing products and huge impact on cash flows. So the first sector, actually, even before anything happened, and if you see the IT/ITES sector, recognizing the key nature of this sector to the from India to the world, the relaxation of work from home norms under the other service provider regime actually happened on the 13th of March, which is much before anything happened. So, and it has been classified as essential services. Every state is making ensuring that data centers, that IT/ITES services, the telecom services are really going to be able to continue to provide the type of services they're doing to clients around the world. NASSCOM itself has laid down protocols. So if any of your members are getting IT and business process services from India, I think the message is that industry and government will do anything to keep these supplies going, these services going, so there's no need of any fear of any disruption here. The other things are that there are some details of the government and RBI which has announced relief measures. The first announcement related to shifting dates for income tax returns, etc. Then the government announced a 1.7 trillion rupee, which is around 1% of GDP for the bottom of the pyramid, including insurance cover for all frontline medical personnel. And then the RBI in the first way reduced repo rate by 75 basis points. Banks were allowed to give a 3-month moratorium. You've heard the banking perspective from SBI just before. The cash reserve ratio was reduced. Long-term repo rates were up to 3 years tenure were done. And then, of course, the trade policy was extended. Yesterday, the government announced income tax refunds and other initiatives such as allowing EGMs and AGMs to be done online through video conferencing, which is a big thing there. On the right-hand side were all the FICCI suggestions which have been considered by RBI and government, and this is work in progress. What we are actually suggesting is a 4 to 5% of GDP as a stimulus package of 9 to 10 lakh crores, money to be injected for relief and rehabilitation across all the across the economy, specifically informal workers, micro, small and medium enterprises, and large enterprises. We are saying that the FRBM should be allowed to be breached, allow the fiscal limits both at center and state, set up a self-sufficiency fund and an outlay of about 2 lakh crores to promote scientific research and innovation for building the capability to deal with such pandemics in the future. Also creating manufacturing clusters within India. The main discussion now we are having here is that we need to plan for a phased opening up of the economy and restarting growth, getting workers back to jobs, and trying to divide India into three parts, red, yellow, and green. Green also in two parts where there's no migration of people and when there's migration of people. So where there's no migration of people, to start the economic activity and allow goods to move in and out by having strict checks at the border. And red, we understand the lockdown will continue, but will be more focused in the local areas. So rather than a whole nation approach, we'll move to an inside-out approach by focusing on the the wards and districts where this happens. There's a whole lot of other recommendations that we have given to the government, and I think you will see some of these being announced really here. So the idea is simply to ensure that when we restart, there's at least enough cash flow in the system. To give you a very simple analogy, it's like a car running on reserve, and because you've been operating in a, you can't take the car out, you've been operating it for a few days standing, but you run out of petrol and you don't have even money to fill petrol. So we're saying unless you give money to fill petrol on a loan basis and with a long repayment, you won't get the economy starting again. But I think here is where I would like to say there's a huge area where you can support Australian businesses in India. We have been supporting the healthcare, this thing to ramp up availability of both of beds and personal equipment. A lot of industry has come forward to make masks, sanitizers, or protective equipment. And we are working with on a working group with the Ministry of Textiles on this. A lot of the auto companies have said that they will produce ventilators, including now some of the capital good manufacturers are coming in to give ventilators. Then a lot of activities being done on the CSR in terms of survival kits to vulnerable sectors, giving meals, distributing food, community kitchens. And what really we're working at the state level, we have a nodal officer in each state who is working with the nodal officers in the state to facilitate individual companies' movement of essential goods. If there's a problem in the supply chain, providing a link between the suppliers and buyers, and of course, flagging industry challenges going forward. So I think this was the brief presentation that I had to share with you, and happy to take any questions or anything later.
Thank you. Thank you very much. An excellent comprehensive presentation. We are going to finish this in an hour. And what I'm going to ask is Peter Verghese, Kaji, and Stephanie to give me a 1 minute reaction to the presentation and to what you've heard from the panelists. So we can start with you, Peter. You used to be on the spot.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And Dilip, that was a terrific presentation. It's nice to see you, even if it's across the screen. So the scale of this for India is what I think sort of dominates thinking about where India is at and where it's going. And I think the policy recommendations seem to me to make a lot of sense. To sequence the sort of support for people without employment and in need of assistance, and then the fiscal stimulus, I think is going to be quite a significant policy challenge. And I think the access to capital as India works through the dampening down phase and then into the recovery phase is going to be, I think, quite a crucial ingredient. But overall, I think what it does in my mind is to reinforce the point that everywhere we're going to go through a hunkering down stage and then a recovery stage, which is not going to be straightforward, because this won't be probably a V or even a U. It's going to be different rates of recovery across different sectors. And that, of course, has implications not just for each of our national economies, but also for the way in which our own trade and investment bilaterally will play out. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Kaji, do you want to make a quick comment? Yep.
Am I audible?
Over to you.
Yeah.
Yep.
So as I've already said, I mean, for the moment, for the High Commission, I mean, short-term goal is to look after the welfare of our citizens here in Australia. However, as SBI has pointed out, I mean, this is news to us. We'd like to hear more from what's actually going on there. So maybe Pranay, I'll get in touch with you separately.
Excellent. Okay.
So at this moment, whatever I say regarding the future trajectory, I really feel that it would be it would be how do I put it? It would be speculation. Let's wait and watch how the trajectory actually happens over the next maybe a month or two, so that we have a definite idea. Thanks.
We certainly respect that. And can I ask Stephanie, she'd like to make that final comment?
Yeah, I would like to comment on a couple of items that people have mentioned, and that is around the health issue and particularly around ventilators. It's been received very well in Australia that India is now able to manufacture simplified ventilators that are at a cost that's affordable in places like Australia. So I think it's fantastic for India's reputation to be able to strip down some of the critical machinery that we need at this time and be able to produce it quickly and export it for a price that's affordable. And so I think the ventilators coming to Australia is a really good news story, but also the tests, the coronavirus test that's being developed in India, and the waiting time has been reduced from 7 hours, I think, to 2.5 hours. So India is also already globally known for the quality of the medical system and the doctors that now practice all over the world. So I see this as an opportunity for India to enhance its global reputation, and especially here in Australia. So we're at Austrade, we're going to amplify both of those elements, because we think that this will establish, contribute to a very positive relationship between Australia and India.
Thanks very much. We've got 5 minutes. I'm going to ask for those that haven't responded to do something very unusual. I want you to give me just 2 keywords that for you summarizes the dialogue we've had today. So I'll start with Shiva. Just 2 keywords.
Thank you very much, Jim. My 2 keywords would be digital and digital. I just see so many opportunities both for Australia and India.
Perfect. Jitesh, your 2 keywords? Jitesh,
thank you,
still
Jim.
there?
Yeah, yes, mine are 3.
Just
Jim.
2 keywords.
Collaborate, cooperate, and co-create. So I'm using that liberty of saying the 3rd one.
Okay, excellent. Mukund?
I'd have to say scale and inclusiveness.
Okay, excellent. Tanya Uni, 3 keywords.
I would say digital healthcare, artificial intelligence for healthcare.
Excellent. Irfan, 3 keywords.
Innovation, collaboration, opportunity.
Right. Mr. Subramanian, 3 keywords.
Human ingenuity, collaboration, and innovation.
Excellent. Pranay Kumar, 3 keywords from you.
All companies have not to give up, they have to believe that system will come back. Number one. Number two is that is a perfect learning that we should always keep the margin or buffer or liquidity to sustain in the difficult time.
Thank you. Samir, got the final word?
Adapt, innovate, and be agile.
Excellent. And I think that means we have covered all the panel and we're just about hitting 5 o'clock.
Jim,
So can I just sorry?
Can I add 3?
Yes, please.
So partnership, precaution, and positivity.
Okay, excellent. So can I take this opportunity to thank all of our panelists? It's always a challenge to pack so much of great depth and knowledge in 1 hour, but you've done it. Well done. I think for those that are listening to this, this is an absolute treasure trove of very important insights, facts, presentations, mix of diversity that really augurs well for the future. An event like this doesn't happen without a lot of support, and this is probably the most shortest noticed event we've ever done, let alone do it collaboratively with FICCI. And I congratulate FICCI Jasmith Singh, who's been working really hard here as Australia to make this happen. Wendy Farrell from AIBC, the National Secretariat, I think she's lost still trying to catch up on her sleep. Dr. Nick Senapathy, who is the chair of FICCI and New Zealand here in this end of town. Vishal, who's also been helping, that's great. But can I also thank all of those who have registered? To get 150 registrations in such a short notice is a great achievement. And I hope you gain a lot from it. And if you do have questions, put them in and we'll make every attempt to answer them. Can I also say for those of you that were listening to Dilip's presentation, there is an article that will be published from FICCI in our next newsletter, which will go out sometime in the weekend. And that's called A Time to Invest in Long-Term Partnership with India by Manish Singhal, the Deputy Secretary of FICCI, Gaurav Vats, the Additional Director of FICCI, and Malvika Carrier, the Senior Assistant Director of FICCI. And with that, I'm exactly on time at 5 o'clock, which means we'll have more of these events because people will know they'll start and finish it exactly at that time. Thanks very much. Namaste, and have a great morning and the rest of the evening.